Tonight, the stakes are high. President Trump embarking on a cross-country tour of Asia, confronting trade, tariffs, and rising tensions with Russia and China. We break down the implications on the economy, national security, and beyond. Plus, demolition debate. The White House moves forward with construction of a new $300 million ballroom.
It's gotten great reviews. It's gotten really great reviews.
The pushback from Democrats and D.C. residents. And confronting church hurt.
God had always been faithful to me. He had always shown up. He had always been the father he said he was going to be. So yes, all of these people had failed me. But when I looked back over the course of my life, God never had.
The work to bring healing and reconciliation within the body of Christ. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. From Washington to Asia to the Middle East, President Trump is making headlines around the globe. Good evening in Washington, I'm Jenna Browder. It has been a whirlwind week in Washington for sure. The government shutdown is now heading into week 4 with no clear end in sight, and Americans across the country starting to feel the pressure. At the same time, the White House is getting a facelift. President Trump renovating part of the East Wing. He's also pulling the plug on trade talks with Canada, launching new strikes against drug traffickers in the Caribbean, and preparing for a major trip to Asia. A lot to unpack as usual, so let's bring in our Faith Nation panel. CBN News Chief Political Analyst David Brody and CBN White House Correspondent, Senior White House Correspondent Kelly Wright. Gentlemen, welcome. Let's start with the government shutdown tonight. You know, neither side looks to be budging, and now we're looking at flight delays and cancellations. Air traffic controllers, they're not showing up for work. A lot of other fallout. Kelly, what is the White House saying tonight? And is there any concern it may have to actually act here?
Jenna, good evening to you. So yesterday during the White House press briefing, Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, talked about the pain that was coming to Americans, most notably what's going on with air traffic control. Also, there's the fact that the SNAP program is going to basically be without money come November 1st. That's going to affect at least 40 million people or more who rely on that SNAP program for nutrition, for getting food to their table. And then the fact that the government workers are out of work, and the government workers, as of today, are not being paid. And that is problematic for literally thousands, hundreds of thousands of government workers who never expected to find themselves in this predicament. And some even here locally in the nation's capital have been reporting to food lines, to get in food lines to get food. So it's really a situation right now where Democrats continue to blame Republicans, Republicans continue to blame Democrats, and the president is actually looking at Democrats as being the blame as well. But that doesn't matter to the people who are without food and money right now.
Yeah, you know, David, so far the votes have really fallen along party lines, with a few Democrats voting to end the shutdown. You know, Obamacare's open enrollment starts in November. The expiring tax credits are threatening to raise health care costs for some 24 million people in the marketplace. David, with all of that said, could we start to see more Democrats peel off in favor of funding the government?
I actually think it might be the opposite. November 1st, as you mentioned, Obamacare enrollment begins. And of course, Kelly mentioned the SNAP benefits, the food stamp program, if you will, start to run out of money. Would not surprise me, obviously, to see that mainstream media consortium go ahead and start to peddle out stories about folks that are down and out, whether it be on those enrolling for Obamacare and seeing their premiums start to go up, and look at some of the costs affected with that, and also the SNAP program as well. So I think when you start to see those stories come out in the media, the Democrats will seize upon that opportunity from a PR perspective and say, look, this needs to get fixed. And it could put some pressure on Republicans to maybe come up with some sort of loose framework going forward, nothing to agree to, because the Republicans will say, no, of course, we're not going to agree to anything while the government is shut down. But maybe the week of November 3rd, would be a time where we could see this impasse potentially come to an end, because at that point, Democrats will say, look, you got to do something. Republicans will realize we better start doing something here, and a loose framework could basically be come to fruition, but not until the government opens.
Yeah, we will see. Let's talk about the White House demolition. The White House is building a $300 million ballroom off of the East Wing. Kelly, if you could, what are some of the reasons the White House is saying this construction is needed?
Well, I can start off by saying it's very different to look over there and not see the East Wing there. But the president has wanted to build a big, beautiful ballroom, if you will. And this big, beautiful ballroom started with $200 million that the president thought would be necessary to build it. And now it's ballooned to $300 million. The president says he's getting that money from private investors, and people are already investing in that. And he wants to build something that's big enough to support 999 people. He didn't want to go to the full 1,000, but he believed that it was too confining and that it needed more space, because a lot of people going in for these historical events in the East Room are being cramped. And he wanted to expand it and brought it to have more people be able to participate and enjoy and fall in love with the White House.
Yeah. Right now, when they have those big events, they're really in the Rose Garden and they're under a tent. And he was saying, when it rains, it can get muddy and this, that, and the other. David, there at the same time is a ton of outrage over this project. Some people, they just don't like the project itself. Others don't like it because it's President Trump. There's also questions about how it's getting paid for. Kelly mentioned the private donations, concerns there about possible quid pro quo. The needed permissions. The White House has not necessarily gotten all of those permissions. There is precedence for the White House renovations, but David, could the White House be doing a better job at selling this to the American people and explaining why it thinks it's needed?
I mean, maybe from a PR perspective, if we want to nitpick, that's fine. We can do that. And there's nothing like Monday morning quarterbacking in Washington. There are plenty of Monday morning quarterbacks. Having said that, it feels like very much a non-story. I mean, this is not taxpayer dollar money. If it were taxpayer dollar money, that would be one thing. But this is private donations, even President Trump putting some of his own money into this. And let's remember this ballroom, and I don't have an exact time as to when it'll be ready, but bottom line is, even if there's about a year left in President Trump's second term, I mean, it's not like he's going to get to enjoy all of this. This isn't for him. This is for future presidents. And the way he sees it, he wants America to be grand and big and flashy, and we want to show people how great we are and how big we are. And he doesn't want to stuff people into a crammed East Room of the White House. So, from President Trump's perspective, this is part of his Make America Great Again agenda. I just think it's just a big nothing burger, quite frankly. I mean, you want to talk quid pro quo. I guess we can talk about it down the line if indeed that happens. But right now, look at Truman back in the 50s when he was they were gutting the interior of the White House. I mean, you just go down the line where everybody talks about Obama, some of the recent stuff. Let's go back to Truman. I mean, he was doing that. And I understand there were some safety concerns, and that's why they did that. But that was on the taxpayer dime. This is not. The whole thing just seems utterly ridiculous to me, quite frankly.
I can tell you from personal experience, not to interrupt David, but to his point, when we're in there, when we were in there, it was pretty crowded. A lot of the reporters and photographers just standing toe to toe, waiting for the president to speak, and it gets very crowded.
Yeah, I mean, you both know, we all know the White House is not a big place. It really is quite small, actually. I have to ask you both about China. President Trump, he's expected to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping next week in South Korea. Kelly, what are we looking for on this trip, and what is the president hoping to get out of it?
Look, the president is optimistic. He's hopeful, but let's face it, China is very tough, and China wants to continue to pummel us as an adversary. They've been very difficult to deal with. The president will have a difficult task when he meets face-to-face with Xi.
Okay, David, final word?
I think the key here is to make sure China can somehow get economically isolated, and that means bringing India and others on board to make sure that China doesn't have the last say economically. You can do that, then you can make some headwinds, and you can have some more trade leverage there.
Yeah, well, Trump has proven to be a deal maker. We'll see what happens. All right, David and Kelly, thank you both. And coming up, the U.S. pushes to keep the peace in Gaza as a sanctions showdown heats up between Washington and Moscow. Welcome back. Now we face days of destiny. That's how Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is describing opportunities and challenges facing Israel today. Netanyahu made those comments standing next to U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He is the latest in a string of U.S. officials working to preserve President Trump's peace deal. CBN's Julie Saul reports from Jerusalem.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with Secretary of State Marco Rubio shortly after his arrival. His visit comes on the heels of Vice President J.D. Vance and negotiators Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. President Trump visited last week.
This is a circle of trust and partnership. You've been an extraordinary friend of Israel, and now we face days of destiny. We want to advance peace. We still have security challenges. But I think that we can work together, and by working together, both address the challenges and seize the opportunities.
Rubio noted that it's just over a week since President Trump's work led to the release of 20 living hostages and a ceasefire. Hamas also agreed to the return of 28 dead hostages, but 13 are still unaccounted for, leading to charges they violated the deal.
No one's under any illusions. We've already done the impossible once, and we intend to keep doing that if we can. We have good partners that we're working on, but we feel confident and positive about the progress that's being made. We're clear-eyed about the challenges, too.
A small number of Knesset members put a strain on the U.S.-Israel relationship when they passed the first reading of a bill to extend Israeli sovereignty over biblical Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank. When asked if he thought the sovereignty vote would affect the peace plan, Trump said,
They're not going to do anything with the West Bank. Don't worry about it. Israel's doing very well. They're not going to do anything with it.
He also told Time magazine that Israel would lose U.S. support if that happened. The Prime Minister's office said the vote was a deliberate political provocation by the opposition to sow discord during Vice President J.D. Vance's visit to Israel. Tech columnist and Israel advocate Hillel Fold tells CBN News he sees the vote as part of a global political trend to tear down political leaders.
And so the opposition said, oh, here's a good way to give it to Bibi. We're going to vote for, sovereignty in Judea and Samaria and just annoy the vice president, which they did.
Regarding Trump's statements, Fold says he believes Trump is a real friend to Israel, but that could change.
I think it's a little bit absurd, for lack of a better term, that the United States of America thinks it has the right to dictate to Israel a decision that's internal to Israel, let alone a security issue.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Senior White House correspondent Kelly Wright is back with us again. So, Kelly, we've seen all of these top U.S. officials in Israel. What is the administration's ultimate goal in this phase of the deal, and how close are we to phase two?
So, Jenna, the ultimate goal is to get all of the players in this, most notably Hamas and Israel, to comply with the 20-point plan. Israel is doing its part so far. Hamas has not. That's been the problem. Hamas has been very disruptive to this process. Many people on the outside looking in had suspected that Hamas would be a troublemaker. And until Hamas totally disarms, as well as returns, as you saw in Julie's report, the 13 dead bodies that are still missing, and that is part of the deal of getting that first phase done, this is going to be a problem, especially with Hamas taking some of its hostilities out on its own people. And that's been publicly displayed. So the big question is, when you have protests going around the world against Israel, when Israel began to retaliate and defend itself against Hamas, you have Hamas now showing its true colors, and no one's in the streets protesting. But President Trump and his aides, as his envoys, are over there trying to make sure that peace, this fragile peace, is actually brokered and stabilized.
Yeah, they're trying as hard as they can to keep this peace deal on track. As Julie reported, though, political developments there are complicating things, including that parliament vote to annex the West Bank. Kelly, how concerned is the White House that internal Israeli politics could derail the progress?
Well, look, that's another
so
reason why you see the efforts being made by the vice president, as well as Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio going there to shore up their support for Bibi Netanyahu and his government in doing the right thing. There are factions within the Israeli Knesset that have long pushed for annexation of the West Bank, and that's been a problem. It's been a problem that's been perceived through the Arab world as saying that that is something that would lead to, as they've said, ethnic cleansing, but it would also lead to Israel wanting to have total domination over that. That is not going to happen under this current plan, this 20-point plan. What's supposed to happen under this 20-point plan is to bring the Arab world and Israel back together to reconfigure and rededicate themselves to the Abraham Accords or the Abraham Accords to have this development of peace and trade.
Yeah. Kelly, while I have you here, let's talk about Russia. We saw, major policy shift this week from the Trump administration issuing its first sanctions against Moscow. What prompted this shift, Kelly?
So, look, Russia, like China, remains a sore to the president. It's frustrating. He's been dealing with Vladimir Putin and trying to give the best face forward and the best foot forward towards brokering a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. Russia has not done that. Vladimir Putin has made it abundantly clear that he will talk to the president, but then go off and do something else, like attack innocent people. And the president, on that phone call last Thursday, prior to the meeting that he had with Volodymyr Zelensky in the White House on Friday, had instructed him and told him, please stop killing. In fact, ordered him to say, stop killing civilian people in Ukraine. That has not happened. Putin continues to keep trying the president and trying Ukraine, as well as trying to inflict some probing of NATO forces. So NATO and the United States are very much aware, and Ukraine's very much aware, that Putin has to be stopped.
Yeah. Well, Kelly, it's a lot to keep track of. There is so much going on, foreign, domestic, all of it, and you're doing a great job. Senior White House correspondent Kelly Wright, thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, finding faith after church hurt. How some broken by religion are rebuilding a stronger relationship with God. Welcome back. While Washington remains divided, college students across the nation are coming together to worship Jesus. Some 7,000 students turned out for the latest Unite Us event, this one at Grand Canyon University in Phoenix, Arizona. They came to worship, pray, and find new life. The ministry reports 4,300 students rededicated their lives to Christ, with 58 new commitments and 251 baptisms. More than 2,600 said they're interested in taking part in college ministries. The next Unite Us event is in Cincinnati, Ohio on November 5th. Well, for many people, church feels like a safe haven, a place to find community and peace. But for others, it can sadly become a place of deep hurt. The term church hurt has become more widely recognized, referring to the emotional and spiritual wounds caused by abuse, manipulation, and unhealthy church cultures. CBN's Brody Carter takes a closer look at how some are healing from religious trauma and the tough decisions they face to stay, step away, or start over.
Spiritual abuse can happen in different ways. A mark left by the church, whether good or bad, can last a lifetime.
If people are hearing messages all the time about you're bad, you're a sinner, you're going to hell, you're the worst, that environment could be considered an abusive environment that could evoke a trauma response in an individual.
Dr. Catherine Keller, a therapist in Dallas, Texas, says a church culture of fear and shame can leave people feeling like outsiders, even ostracized over political or theological differences. She tells CBN News the number one issue clients bring to her is religious trauma, and she compares it to domestic violence.
There's an idea called the power and control wheel, where it talks about different elements of power and control in abusive relationships. When I train therapists on religious trauma, I use that model that comes from the domestic violence literature and cater it to what happens in high control religious systems.
Keller adds the definition of church hurt is broad, typically stemming from experiences of fear, control, or shame within controlling spiritual environments.
Healed people will also help heal people. And that's the beauty of the family of God, is that we can simultaneously be hurt and healing at the same time as we live together in unity.
Author Natalie Runyon understands that struggle. As a pastor's kid who grew up serving in church, she considered walking away after her father had to resign from his position. Studies show more than 1 million Americans leave the church each year, many never returning.
You know, I always kept going back. Even when I would get hurt by a church, I never left the church. I never isolated. I always had women and pastors around me that were constantly reminding me of the goodness of the Lord.
Natalie says during that experience, her faith took a new turn. What began as a personal journey became her platform, and eventually the book, Raised to Stay.
That was actually one of the biggest criticisms that I got when I would hashtag Raised to Stay. People would say, are you telling us to stay in abusive, toxic environments? And the answer was absolutely not. What I'm doing is saying that if you find yourself in that, get out, but hold on to Jesus. Remain with Jesus. John 15, remain in me and I will remain in you. Stay with me and I will stay with you, to give you discernment to know, hey, you've got to get out of here and go somewhere healthy.
Although they took different paths, both Natalie and Dr. Keller say separating faith from toxic structures led to a stronger, more honest relationship with God.
God had always been faithful to me. He had always shown up. He had always been the father he said he was going to be. So yes, all these people had failed me. But when I looked back over the course of my life, God never had. So it was either turn away from the one who had never failed me because of a few people who did, or stay in position with him and let him do what his word promised.
Brody Carter, CBN News.
Finally tonight, it's checkmate for two Colorado brothers looking to take their love of the Kings game overseas. Griffin and Sullivan McConnell headed to Kazakhstan to represent Team USA in the Chess Olympiad, a competition for people with disabilities. For 21-year-old Griffin, chess is more than just a game. It was a real source of therapy and healing while recovering from brain surgery after years of seizures. He is now seizure-free and says he's ready to take on the competition with his brother by his side.
If one falls, the other shall rise to take his place. And we're like a hydra.
And the brothers will face off with players from 30 countries. And as you saw there, they are approaching the tournament with a competitive spirit and a little sprinkle of humor. And good luck to both of them. That's going to do it for Faith Nation this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.